The greatest vulnerability you possess is not your physical strength or your material resources, but the condition of your interior life, the calm space where your spirit resides. You see the constant barrage of minor offenses, accusations, and slights that swirl in the modern world. And the true cost of these interactions is not the argument you lose, but the deep, foundational peace you surrender. If this idea of radical, unbothered spiritual stability speaks to you, take a moment and subscribe to Bible Underlined for more truth that cuts through the noise. The peace that Christ demonstrated, a peace that remained unshakable even on the path to the cross, was never a passive absence of trouble, but an active spiritual defense, a non-negotiable authority over the soul. To understand this depth of calm, we must move beyond the common misunderstanding that peace is merely a feeling or the result of favorable circumstances. Biblical peace, or shalom, is a comprehensive theological concept. It signifies wholeness, completeness, and right relationship, a state of thriving where everything is aligned according to God's intended order. When someone attempts to provoke you, they are not simply trying to ruin your mood. They are launching an assault against the established order of shalom within your life. They are challenging the fortress of your composure, seeking to create chaos where God has established cosmic coherence. The initial truth, therefore, is that your peace functions as a form of divine protection. It is the spiritual armor that determines the outcome of any encounter before a single word is exchanged. The enemy, in the broadest scriptural sense, knows he cannot steal your salvation or your eternal position in Christ. But he can absolutely bankrupt your daily experience of the kingdom. The strategy is simple: beta reaction. The true measure of an attack is not the size of the initial injury, but the spiritual energy you spend trying to retaliate or correct the offense. Every moment of rage, every minute spent rehearsing a defensive counterargument, and every breath lost to frustration is fuel for the chaos, and it drains you of the focus required to walk out your divine purpose. When we lose our calm, we lose our concentration, and the primary objective of any spiritual armor is to keep the heart and mind fixed. The Apostle Paul articulated this perfectly when he wrote that the peace of God, a peace that defies human comprehension, acts as a garrison, a literal military guard, over the hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Peace, in this context, is not a feeling we try to hold on to. It is the boundary that holds us in. When you refuse to engage with provocation, you are not displaying weakness. You are confirming the invulnerability of the spiritual boundaries God established around you. Imagine a massive ancient wall built not of stone, but of silence and deliberate non-reaction. Every time a verbal missile is launched at you, and you choose restraint, that missile harmlessly impacts the wall. If you react, you are opening a gate and inviting the conflict inside. The modern world is obsessed with clapping back, or proving a point, equating silence with being a doormat. But the spiritual life operates on a paradoxical economy. The quieter you become in the face of accusation, the louder your inner authority speaks. The true test of your spiritual depth is not your ability to preach or perform, but your capacity to remain unbothered when you are deliberately disturbed. The power is not in the defense you make, but in the defense God is. This leads us to recognize a crucial distinction. Offense is a trap, not a necessary test. The difference is subtle yet profound. A test is designed to measure and strengthen your character. A trap is designed solely to ensnare and paralyze your freedom. Jesus, who understood the human condition with ultimate clarity, made this solemn observation that offenses, literally stumbling blocks, are an inevitable reality in this fallen world. He never promised you could avoid the situation where someone attempts to offend you. His promise lies in your ability to choose whether you will live offended. The person who is merely tested faces the difficulty, learns, and moves on. The person caught in a trap remains emotionally stuck, bound to the very person or circumstance that caused the hurt. The hook of the trap is the compulsion to replay the injury. When we internalize an offense, we repeatedly run the hurtful script in our minds. giving the perpetrator free access to our mental space long after the interaction has ended. We rehearse the conversation, invent the perfect counter-argument, and sink deeper into the poison of resentment. Forgiveness, in this scenario, is not about validating the other person's actions or dismissing the hurt. It is a declaration of personal sovereignty. It is saying, I refuse to let the mistake you made or the words you spoke hold my future hostage. You let go of the debt of hurt, not for their benefit, but because peace cannot coexist with the obsessive retelling of old pain. Staying offended is a voluntary form of bondage, tying your current spiritual state to the emotional liability of another person. It is impossible to walk in the fullness of Christ's freedom while actively gripping the chain that tethers you to yesterday is offense. This act of letting go is an absolute prerequisite to engaging the next foundational principle of the unbothered life, which is the radical acceptance of stillness. This radical acceptance of stillness is consistently mistaken for passivity, but scripturally, it is the highest form of spiritual aggression. When Moses stood before the churning chaos of the Red Sea, trapped between the water and the pursuing Egyptian army, the command was not to fight or strategize, but simply to be still and see the salvation of the Lord. This command, Hithyat 7 Hebrew, carries the weight of taking one's stand or placing oneself firmly in position. It is an active posture of resolute trust, not merely an absence of motion. Stillness, then, is the act of surrender, a conscious decision to transfer the battle from your limited strength to God's unlimited sovereignty. The world trains us to believe that control equals security. We are conditioned to immediately speak up, defend our honor, justify our position, or match an adversary's intensity. This reaction is fundamentally rooted in the belief that if we do not fight, the wrong will prevail and we will be diminished. But when we choose stillness, we are making the profound theological statement, God, I trust your justice more than my ability to defend myself, and I trust your power more than my need for immediate resolution. This trust activates the promise, the Lord will fight for you. Many battles in the spiritual life are not won by the sword of human argument, but by the shield of quiet restraint. Christ demonstrated this mastery perfectly during his trial. Facing baseless accusations, insults, and the ultimate injustice, his silence spoke volumes. It was not the silence of a man who had nothing to say, but the silence of the Son of God who knew his authority required no defense before fleeting human powers. His stillness did not prove he was powerless. It proved he was protected by a power far greater than his accusers. Yet, this power of stillness is constantly undermined by the most persistent spiritual adversary, pride. The source of most outrage, offense, and subsequent anger is not genuine pain, but wounded ego. Pride whispers a series of insidious lies. I deserve better treatment than this. They have no right to talk to me that way. My reputation demands a response, or I must be understood and validated. This demanding, entitled internal voice is what leads to the swift loss of peace. When our ego runs our emotions, our composure becomes conditional, dependent on the deference and respect of imperfect, fallible human beings. The moment someone fails to meet the internal standard set by our pride, the reaction is not hurt, but righteous indignation, which is anger cloaked in self-justification. The biblical contrast is stark. The scriptures warn that God sets himself against the proud, yet grants grace, undeserved favor, and power to the humble. Humility is not a diminished self-view. It is an accurate Christ-centered view. It is recognizing that your identity is not derived from how others treat you or what arguments you win, but entirely from your adoption as a child of God. When pride dies, the need to win every disagreement or to be universally understood dies with it. This is the birthplace of peace. You cease to be a puppet pulled by the strings of public opinion or personal insult, and you become anchored by an internal truth that no external storm can extinguish. You begin to value your internal spiritual stability, your shalom, more than your external image or temporary victory. Consider the practical implications of this. When someone provokes you, the immediate reaction is driven by a desire for control over their narrative, control over the situation, control over your own perceived loss of face. Humility reorients this impulse. It tells you that you are not, in fact, responsible for controlling the actions or opinions of others. You are only responsible for the integrity of your own spirit. This radical shift releases a tremendous burden. When you stop fighting for control, you start watching God move on your behalf, often in ways you could never orchestrate. It's an act of deep faith to hand over the right to retaliation, correction, or justification. But that surrender is the exact pathway to untainted, unbroken calm. The fight, then, is not against the people who offend you, but against the internal voice of pride that demands you react. To overcome this, we must deliberately redirect our focus, which is the necessary step after the foundational acts of stillness and humility have been put into place. This intentional redirection of focus is the true anchor of unshakable peace, proving that when your eyes stay on the divine, the storms of human conduct lose their power to move you. The Apostle Peter's dramatic walk on the water serves as the perfect illustration of this principle, showing the precise moment peace begins to sink. Peter was performing the impossible, defying natural law, so long as his gaze was fixed solely on Christ. The moment he allowed his attention to shift to the circumstances, the raging wind, the crashing waves, the sheer impossibility of the situation, his faith failed, and he began to founder. This is precisely what happens when we shift our focus from the immutable character of God to the mercurial, hurtful, and imperfect actions of people. Your peace doesn't erode because the storm got bigger. It erodes because your attention drifted from the source of power to the source of the problem. When someone hurts you or acts unjustly, that offense is your wind and waves. The moment you stare at the injury, rehearsing the pain and allowing the details of the offense to dominate your consciousness, you have momentarily forgotten the one who heals and sustains you. You cannot control how people act, but your sovereign control over where you look your intellectual and spiritual gaze is absolute. The prophet Isaiah offers the ultimate promise for those who maintain this fixed perspective. You will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, all whose thoughts are fixed on you. The Hebrew phrase for perfect peace is shalom. Shalom, a doubled or intensified form, indicating the highest degree of completeness and security. The condition for receiving this intensified state is having a mind that is stayed, an active, persistent fixing of thought on God's nature. This is a deliberate cognitive choice to see God as the primary, defining reality, and human offense as a secondary, passing phenomenon. When anger rises, the instruction is not to suppress it, which is impossible, but to redirect it. Instead of reacting to the person, you redirect your whole attention to the one who is the steadfast anchor. He is the Emmanuel, the God with us, who keeps the soul steady when the emotions are trying to take the helm. This deep anchoring ties directly back to the death of pride and the radical embrace of humility. Pride creates a self-referential world where every offense is magnified because it is viewed in relation to me and my standards. Humility, however, recenters the entire universe on Christ. When you fully grasp that your inherent worth is established by divine love and not by human affirmation or respect, the power of insult collapses. The greatest spiritual strength does not come from winning an argument, but from being utterly unmoved by the fact that you were misunderstood, maligned, or unfairly judged. Humility, therefore, is not a suggestion for spiritual growth. It is the operating system for perfect peace. James explicitly states that God resists the proud. To resist means to stand against, to oppose. When we react in pride, demanding vindication, we align ourselves against the very source of grace. But to the humble, God gives grace, the power to overcome the demand for reaction. This grace is what allows you to choose surrender over self-defense, knowing that the ultimate vindication is secured not by your sharp reply, but by Christ's finished work. This is the great paradox. Only by willingly relinquishing your perceived right to control the outcome of an interpersonal conflict, do you gain complete control over your inner life. This internal stability, maintained through redirected focus and active humility, is not the end of the journey, but the platform for the most profound aspect of the Christ-like life, using your stillness as a powerful, silent witness. The world expects collapse or combat, but the kingdom requires something entirely different. This quiet strength, this radical calm in chaos, becomes the most effective and undeniable witness to the world, a sermon preached not with eloquent words, but with an unshakable spirit. The world operates on a predictable stimulus-response loop. Attack leads to defense, insult leads to retaliation, and chaos generates more chaos. When you interrupt this loop by responding to provocation with grace, stillness, and patience, you fundamentally challenge the world's entire relational framework. People do not expect silence. They expect a breakdown, a justification, or an escalation. Your peace, therefore, speaks louder than any defense you could ever mount. The witness of your peace reveals your true allegiance. The Beatitudes call those who actively work to restore alignment and wholeness the peacemakers, children of God. This designation suggests that peace is not just something you feel privately. It is something you produce publicly. It is a defining characteristic that demonstrates whose kingdom you belong to. Every time you respond to an unrighteous attack with quiet dignity, you are reminding the observers and yourself that your spirit is not governed by the volatile emotions of others, but by the established rule of God. This non-reaction is a practical demonstration of the power of the gospel to transform human nature from reactive self-defense to proactive kingdom-focused love. The final and most compelling reason to refuse the bait of anger is that it is the highest form of worship and the primary work of reconciliation. When we choose peace over reaction, we are essentially saying, I recognize the image of God in this imperfect person, even as they fail to reflect it, and I will not let their temporary failure to see me justly compromise my eternal calling to see them with love. This is the path of Christ, who, when reviled, did not revile in return, but entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He absorbed the chaos and refused to perpetuate the cycle of offense. This agape love, this intentional, costly goodwill, is the ultimate expression of spiritual maturity. This kind of peace cannot be found in a perfectly quiet room or a day free of troubles. It is forged in the middle of chaos. It is a spiritual muscle that is built through repeated exercises of choosing stillness over reaction and surrender over control. It demands a moment-by-moment decision. Is this temporary feeling of vindication, this brief moment of proving myself right, worth handing over the profound, non-negotiable peace that God has granted me? The answer must consistently be no. The more you guard the sanctity of your interior life, the more you become a vessel through which Christ's own sovereign calm flows. The unbothered life is not the product of a perfect personality, but the result of a deliberate, daily refusal to pick up the swords others hand to you. It culminates in a life lived with a quiet authority, recognizing that your status, your worth, and your justice are secured by a divine, eternal contract. You can walk away from the argument, not out of fear, but out of a supreme confidence that the Lord of hosts saw it all, and he is the only audience whose approval truly matters. This peace, protected and practiced, is your power, your witness, and your ongoing transformation into the image of Christ himself.